Phage the Untouchable is a very funny win con for Commander. Very cool card, but pretty difficult to pull off. Mimeoplasm makes it significantly easier. With Mimeoplasm, you can copy an unblockable creature to get in, and then after no blocks are declared before damage, you shift it back into Phage, and boom, player out, dead. Amazing. There are a lot of really cool synergies I want to talk about with Mimeoplasm. This seems like one of the most fun commanders from Aetherdrift. Let me know in the comments if you plan on building Mimeoplasm and what you think about my build. Also subscribe to the channel if you aren't subscribed already. Outside of the Phage the Untouchable and an unblockable creature combo with Mimeoplasm, there's another combo I wanted to mention here. If you have Mimeoplasm turn into a big mana dork, a mana dork that can tap for a lot of mana, you can pretty easily make infinite mana. There's Bighorner Rancher, Deathbloom Ritualist, Gyre Sage, Kami of Whispered Hopes, Marwyn, and Sylvala as some big mana dorks, and you can also copy a creature that lets you untap Mimeoplasm, like Morphling or Horseshoe Crab. Doing so means that you can tap Mimeoplasm for a lot of mana after turning into a big mana dork, shift it into an untapper, and then untap, and then shift it back into the big mana dork, and generate infinite mana through that. Obviously, the mana dork needs to be able to tap for a lot of mana, so Sylvala and Kami of Whispered Hopes are two of my favorites here. One of the other ways you can kind of combo off with this deck is through Infect. You again turn into something unblockable, and then get in and then shift it into an Infect creature to kill your opponents. 3 +1/+1 counters per creature exiled adds up really, really fast. You exile 4 creatures, that's lethal Infect. So, some of the good Infect creatures that you can throw into this deck to turn Mimeoplasm into are Blight Mamba, which also lets you regenerate, which is nice extra protection. Similarly, you have Skitherix, Skittles, which in addition to regenerate has flying and haste available, and Toxic Nim. Blighted Agent is probably the best card for this whole deck because it's an unblockable Infect creature, which just means Mimeoplasm only has to shift once to kill somebody. Phyrexian Crusader, which in addition to Infect gives you First Strike, Pro Red, and White. Putrefax, which also gives you Trample and Haste. You just gotta make sure you shift it before your end step. Spinebiter, which is essentially an unblockable Infect creature. And Viral Drake, which also lets you proliferate, which is pretty nice in this deck because this is a +1/+1 counter heavy deck. Along with ways to win the game, you're going to want to have ways to keep Mimeoplasm alive. There's a lot of creatures that you can exile with Mimeoplasm that you can shift into to protect it from all sorts of removal. Archetype of Endurance, which gives your creatures hexproof and also can be utilized to remove hexproof from your opponent's creatures, which is nice. Aven Fleetwing, which also gives you flying. Carnage Tyrant, trample is nice to have as well. Cragplate Baloth gives you haste so you can get in with hexproof. Erebos to give you indestructible and potentially shift it out from being a creature, which could be really nice for something like a Farewell. Giggling Skitter Spike just seems disgusting in this deck. Coma, which also gives you a lot of tokens. Nightveil Predator. Ronus the Indomitable. Sphinx is the final word. Striped Riverwinder, which is beautiful for this deck because it has cycling. There's a few cards I will be mentioning in this video with cycling that are just amazing because they just let you dump them into the graveyard to draw a card, and then you can exile them with Mimeoplasm. Awesome. Great synergy. Thrun the Last Troll. Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. Vashta Narada, which is pretty cool because it also has Shadow. And Venomthrope. Along with all this protection, there's a lot of cards that have good keywords that you might just want to throw onto Mimeoplasm, so that way Mimeoplasm has all the cool keywords. Changeling Outcast to make it unblockable. Elder Gargaroth, a lot of keywords and some good triggers. Froghemoth, Trample Haste and Graveyard Hate. Glissa the Sunslayer's pretty nice here. Goldvein Hydra, which also nice if you're not going to be able to escape removal. You can just generate enough treasures to play Mimeoplasm again. Miri the Cursed, Nighthawk Scavenger, Questing Beast, Quill the Great Worm, Scavenge Brawler, which is nice because if you already have Mimeoplasm in play and then you like mill a Scavenge Brawler, You want those keywords on Mimeoplasm. You can still get them on there by exiling it from your graveyard with Scavenge Brawler's ability. Silent Hall Creeper for some more unblockable. Sire of 7 Deaths, just keyword soup. Titanith Rex is nice. If you already have Mimeoplasm in play, you can cycle it to give trample, and then it's also in your graveyard for a future casting of Mimeoplasm. Tower Winder, which also gets you your command tower, which is pretty nice. Triplicate Titan, Vampire Nighthawk, and Windcaller Aven, which is pretty similar to Titanith Rex, where you can cycle it and give flying, and then have a way to get flying for the next Mimeoplasm. There's also a bunch of creatures that do things based on how big they are. Like, you draw cards equal to the amount of damage they dealt this turn. Stuff like that. Typically, those are pretty small creatures. In this deck, you throw them under Mimeoplasm, you give unblockable, you use switch, then you hit, and boom, you're going to be doing a lot. These effects are going to be much splashier. You have Barrowgoyf to do a lot of milling. Cephalid Constable can bounce an entire player's board. Cold-Eyed Selkie to draw a bunch of cards. Same thing with Fear of Failed Tests. There's Desmond Miles to surveil a whole bunch. Drake Hatcher can make you a bunch of little tokens. Dream Stealer to empty your opponent's hand. Hydra Omnivore can just end up killing everybody. Love that. Lateral Blade of Elves is insane in this deck, especially if you exile an untapper with Mimeoplasm. You can hit with Mimeoplasm Lathriel to make a buttload of elves, shift it into an untapper, untap, shift it back, tap Lathriel to deal a lot of damage, and you can do that multiple times if you have enough elves. Old Gnawbone can make you a bunch of treasures, Piper Wright can make you clues, Shrewfist for some saprolings, and Undead Alchemist can mill your opponents out while making you a bunch of zombies. This is a very +1/+1 counter heavy deck. You're going to have a lot of counters on your Mimeoplasm, so you might as well find ways to utilize those counters outside of just having a big dude. There's a handful of cards that you can have Mimeoplasm turn into that can utilize those counters for different things. Crystalline Crawler, Horus Specs, and Workhorse can all turn those counters into mana. Steelbane Hydra can turn them into artifact and enchantment removal. Triskelevis can make them into tokens. Triskelion, along with Walking Ballista, can turn them into damage. And Twitching Doll is pretty cool. Twitching Doll can just act as a mana dork in the deck, or if you exile it under Mimeoplasm, you can sacrifice Mimeoplasm and make a number of 2/2 green spiders equal to each counter on Mimeoplasm. It doesn't need to be nest counters. That's sick. And lastly, for targets for Mimeoplasm, creatures that you want to exile with Mimeoplasm, I just got some good stuff that just seem powerful in the deck. Ancient Silver Dragon can draw you a ton of cards. Same thing with the green one for +1/+1 counters, and the black one to reanimate stuff from your graveyard. Colossal Sky Turtle. This one's pretty nice just because it does get protection and flying, but it's also a card that you can channel to discard it so that way you can easily get it under Mimeoplasm, and it's both removal and recursion. Consecrated Sphinx. Draw a bunch of cards. Eater of the Dead. This lets you untap Mimeoplasm by exiling things from graveyards. Awesome inside of this deck. It can generate so much value. One of the best cards to put in. Hullbreaker Horror to bounce all of your opponent's stuff. Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur to draw you a ton of cards, which you then will discard and fill your graveyard for a future Mimeoplasm, and make it so your opponents don't have any cards in hand. Nyxbloom Ancient if you want a lot of mana. Platinum Angel is hilarious to be able to turn into at instant speed in case somebody tries to win the game. Seedborn Muse, very nice for this deck. Shieldred the Whispering One lets you reanimate some of the things that you throw into your graveyard. Thada Adele, another way to give unblockable, but also lets you steal things. Troll Khazad-dûm, this is sweet because you can swamp cycle it and then turn Mimeoplasm into it in the future, making it unblockable essentially. Ulamog the Defiler to just exile a ton of cards. And Vorinclex Voice of Hunger, another way to generate a lot of extra mana. In order for this deck to function, you're going to need cards in your graveyard. So we've got a few different ways to do that. We're going to start off by talking about the mill plan. Milling cards means that you're going to have things in your graveyard. So some of the good self-mill includes Aftermath Analyst, which can also get you back a bunch of lands. Alter Dementia, decent especially if somebody tries to kill your Mimeoplasm, you can sack it to mill yourself so that way you refill your graveyard for the next cast. Ashiok Dreamrender, which also hates on your opponent's graveyards. Cemetery Tampering, Circle of the Land Druid, Crawling Infestation, and Crawling Sensation, which also get you a little bit of a bonus whenever you mill certain things. Cut Your Losses is pretty funny here. Deranged Assistant, Glimpse the Unthinkable, my personal favorite mill card, Mesmeric Orb, Millikin, Ripples of Undeath, fantastic here, Stitcher Supplier, and Traumatize. If you're going to do all this milling, you may as well run some mill payoffs like Head Shredder, perfect, ramp yourself. Screeching Scorch Beast, pretty cool. 6, being able to retrace things from your graveyard is amazing. Sir Conrad can drain your opponents out pretty quick, especially with like a Traumatize. And Zelix to generate a bunch of dudes. There's also the very efficient way of picking what's in your graveyard via graveyard tutors. Buried Alive can get you 3 creatures of your choice into the graveyard. This can just win you the game, or at least set up the win. Entomb, Lively Dirge, and Unmarked Grave. Lastly, I want to talk about some one-off cards, cards that didn't fit into the other categories but just work really well in this deck. You have Agatha's Soul Cauldron. If a card ends up in your graveyard after Mimeoplasm is already in play, you can exile the Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and boom, now Mimeoplasm has the abilities. Biomancer's Familiar along with Training Grounds to reduce the cost of its activated ability. Cinderhaze Wretch along with Devoted Druid can let you essentially remove +1/+1 counters to untap Mimeoplasm, which is a really powerful effect. I like that a lot. Cryptic Trilobite can turn those +1/+1 counters into mana for activated abilities. So you can turn into Cryptic Trilobite and then remove a few counters to be able to make some mana for multiple activations of Mimeoplasm on the low, which is pretty good. Ways to give double strike seem fantastic here. Not specifically ways to do it via creatures, but ways to do it to the card itself. So that way you can hit with first strike damage on one creature and then shift into another and hit again for 2 different types of triggers. That seems great. So Fire Shrieker, Grappling Hook, and Leyline Axe all seem like they'd put in a lot of work. Indominus Rex seems like an auto include in this deck. A lot of the cards that I mentioned already in this video are cards that would be inside of an Indominus Rex deck. It will just do a lot of work. Marvin Murderous Mimic is a perfect include. It just lets you have essentially 2 Mimeoplasms. And Muldrotha. You got a lot of stuff going to your graveyard. This way you can play stuff out of your graveyard. That is everything I wanted to talk about for Mimeoplasm. Let me know what your thoughts are, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, everybody.